Thanks for joining us today. My name's Brian Funk with Virtuous. For this next hour, we're really excited to host an interactive, collaborative discussion on the key donor retention strategies to help you unlock generosity. And really the intention here is, we want you to be able to hear from our panel. We also want you all to have the opportunity to ask questions and interact. So we're gonna have about a 20 to 25 minute panel discussion. We'll leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. We'll allow you folks to hop on the mic and interact as well. And then at the end for about 10 minutes, we'll also go into breakout groups to give you the chance to connect to one another and workshop your challenges in a bit more of an intimate setting. So we'll also have some breakout groups. And would love to introduce our panel today. We have Patrick Kirby, who is one of the most high energy folks that I know, founder of Do Good Better Consulting. We have Matt Gherkin here with us today, Managing Director at American Philanthropic. And we also have Cherian Koshi, Director of Development at Des Moines Performing Arts. So thanks y'all for joining us today. And before we open up the panel discussion, want to tee up just a little bit of context. And here at Virtuous, we are a growth partner for nonprofit teams. While we are a software company and we offer a range of a suite of different solutions to help nonprofits grow generosity, these conversations and these roundtables are actually software agnostic. So we will not be talking about software, specifically to one company. Really our intention here is we want to provide tips and strategies and thought leadership to help sector-wide, regardless of what technology that you use. But want to let you know that from providing a responsive fundraising platform to playbooks to hands-on support and weekly events and roundtables and webinars, we are here to help the entire nonprofit sector. And we asked ourselves a question recently about where we are in the current state of fundraising. And a year ago, a little more than a year ago, the world shut down and stay-at-home orders went in place. But the causes and the missions and the people that you all serve did not go on hold, did not go on pause. Homelessness continues. Organizations that provide arts and services, venues are empty. And there was an incredible need of support to keep missions going forward. And the good news is it might not be for every organization. And we want to highlight that and recognize that because it was a really hard year for a lot of organizations. But the good news is that last year, giving was up 10% across the sector from 2019. And so there's hope there. It's a really unique moment in time where donors actually showed up with more generosity last year to help support the causes that they care about most. I think the other really interesting statistic is that lower level donors are up. Gifts under $1,000 are actually up within the last year. So we're seeing an increase in the return of the lower level average everyday donor, which is really encouraging. So now that we are, about a quarter of the way into 2021, the question is, we have this unique moment in time with how are we going to build deeper relationships with these donors in order to keep them, at our side as our partners in fueling our mission. So that's really the foundation for why we're having this conversation today. And a place that I would love to start is so much of what we do is fueled by passion. And so I really want to kick it over to our panelists, give you a chance to get to know them. And I'd love to hear from them. What are you passionate about? What drives you? Why do you wake up every day? What are the causes that you care about and that you serve? What gets you fired up? So we're going to start with, one of our favorite topics. Passion fuels generosity. Passion fuels what we do. It fuels what you do. It's why you're here today. And Patrick, do you want to kick us off?
I would love to. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. If it looks like I'm in a hotel room, it's because I am, because I get to speak in an actual conference in person with actual people this week. And I could not be more excited. I haven't done it in a year and a half, so I'm a little bit nervous about how I actually interact with people in an actual stage environment. So this is a good training ground. I'm going to pretend that you are all in person and wearing pants, and I'm very excited about that. So one of the things that I did, I was recruited to work out as the chief development officer of an organization called the Ann Carlson Center. And they're an organization in flyover country, North Dakota, that assists children and young adults with severe developmental disabilities and delay. So individuals who either survived a hard birth, who are alive through medical miracle or grace of God or what have you. And I got to work as a fundraiser for helping them live independent lives. And to the point where I was maybe complaining about a spreadsheet I had to do for a budget. And then I would see a kid who a doctor said would never walk or talk again, race down a hallway past me, speaking and running, defying all of that. And if we had the ability to raise money to provide physical therapy and treatments that were a little outside of what the medical norm would be, to give these kids a chance at living, what we consider a normal life or what they would consider an independent life, how great is that? And so I get to parlay that every day, working with nonprofits of all shapes and sizes, trying to get their mission going. And we all, as fundraisers, we know we come to a moment where we're exhausted because we do 10,000 different things, and it never ends, right? There's always another sponsorship to get, another dollar to raise, et cetera. But when you make positive impact, you take time out to sort of celebrate a win. That is my go-to thing. And so I love everything that you guys do. But thanks for everybody who hopped on the call today, because what you do matters. And that type of thing just jazzes me up every single day. So
beautiful. Beautiful. Thanks, Patrick. You actually touched on something that I want to put a pin in and I want to revisit later. And you said something about how we as fundraisers are very tired. We are exhausted. Burnout is a real issue facing our sector. And here at Virtuous, we believe that it is a core part of donor retention, because we can't retain our donors and we can't sustain our missions if we don't sustain and take care of ourselves. So that's brilliant. I want to revisit it, but it's not where I want to start. So going to go back to, Sherry Ann, do you want to kick us off and give us some insight into your passion? And I also think I'm going to let Matt back on here. It looks like he was having some connectivity issues.
Yeah, absolutely. While you do that, I'm happy to introduce myself. Everybody, thanks for being here. As Patrick said, my name is Charing Koshi. I work as a fundraiser for Des Moines Performing Arts. And as Brian said, venues are empty, and mine is as well, and has been since March 17th of last year. So we're over a year mark, and we don't have current plans to reopen in the near future, but hopefully that will change. For me, the passion for the arts comes from the fact that if you go back to sacred writings, to the beginning of human history, the one thing that has been constant across civilizations and across time is our wonder at story. And the transmittal of information has come through storytelling. And so I feel very passionate about organizations who put that at the core of their mission, because I believe that stories tell us where we've been, they tell us who we are today, and they tell us where we're going. And I think that's so important to the entirety of the human experience that it engenders empathy. It's how we understand our place in the world and how we understand other people. And, on a personal note, when I get to see my own kids or just other kids get to see live performance for the first time, and that wow on their face, their eyes light up, that's a magical moment for me. And I want that for as many people as possible. I love being an arts fundraiser and have worked in a bunch of different sort of storytelling type organizations all my life.
That was beautiful. I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's a really beautiful tie-in into the work that we all do. We're all telling stories about how people can join us in changing the world in the ways that we do. And that's also the heart of retaining our donors. It's how we are telling our story. What you just shared also reminded me of, I'm a fundraiser by trade, and I've been in the sector as a frontline fundraiser for a long time. And I had probably a couple years into my career, I had this kind of pivotal psychological switch where I realized, like, kind of along this thread of story, was I was telling the story of our mission, but day in and day out, like, what I was actually experiencing was I was seeing how, like, individual people's lives and stories change because of giving and because of their generosity. And it sort of changed my framing as a fundraiser. Like, it sort of redefined my purpose around, wow, like, I'm not here actually to ask someone to open their wallet. I'm actually here as a guide and a mentor to partner with someone to help them define how they want to leave an impact and leave a legacy, and how they're connected to that. So
absolutely,
that's all grounded in story. It's why we're all here. So beautifully said. Matt, close us out on passion.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Brian. My name is Matt Gerken. I'm with American Philanthropic. Been doing fundraising consulting here for 8 years. And, retention is all about passion, right? It's about flipping the script where our day-to-day existence as fundraisers tends to be very organization-centric. It tends to be, the donor as a profile in a database, right? And really flipping the script and thinking through what the donor's journey is, where they're at in that journey, and how can you can stay on that journey with them, with your organization. And that is easy to say, and psychologically, I think, very tough to do for a lot of people, because our days as fundraising staff are focused in a very different way than our donors are. And so, when we get into retention, there's a lot you can say. All fundraising problems are ultimately either acquisition problems or retention problems, I think. And yeah, it's all about connecting with that donor's passion.
Beautiful. Love what you said about the donor journey, and it kind of reminds me of, what is the story and thread that we're telling across all of our channels and all of the different touch points in which we engage and interact with donors. So maybe that leaves us in a nice place where we can kick off about, like, currently, what are the strategies and trends that you all are seeing in the best ways to communicate with donors, potential new donors, repeat donors, supporters, maybe even volunteers, right? Like, the folks that we're engaging with as fundraisers, what are the communication methods that you see that are working?
I'll go first. One of them is asking better questions. It's honestly, I think the way we've always done it, which a phrase that is clearly the most dangerous and most horrible one in the English language, is gone. We now experienced an entire pandemic. We started fundraising virtually. We started having events virtual. So everything we now know has changed. And really, if you think about it, like, there's some really good things about that, is that we had to do a little better research on our donors. We had to go and reach out more often. We had to go old school and pick up the phone, which is just such a dramatic thing that people are so freaked out. And now that there's not an election, nobody's worried about saying, please vote for this person or this person. So going old school and picking up the phone and then asking better questions. And I had a mentor of mine say to me, and I've never forgotten this, and I tell it wherever I can, which is, you never ask a donor for a major gift unless you know the name of their dog. The reason why is because that means you're talking about and you are asking questions that have something to do without the size of their checkbook. And when you go back to have a secondary conversation, which is not talking about how much money you need, it's talking about how they are, what they are interested in. You're right. So we hear donor centric all the time on how we can align their giving. Okay, forget about that. Align yourself with somebody who is willing to pick up the phone because you're interesting. You're asking questions other organizations are not. You're not concerned necessarily with how much money they have, but you're trying to figure out where they stand and what they want to see change and what they want to have as good in this community or in the world or wherever place that you impact.
Mm, brilliant. I love this thread of, it's not just how we communicate, it's how we're listening. Which is, I feel like you're bringing up all these threads that we could kind of go down the rabbit hole through. So love that, Patrick. Matt, would love to hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice from Patrick, and I'm gonna have to ask Patrick for some consulting later on how to be a more interesting person. I think after that, but to kind of go on that thread a little bit, I think it's easier than ever to hear from your donors because we have the tools at our fingertips to do that. Not just major gifts visits, not just phone calls, emails, delivered surveys, those sorts of things. But yeah, you have to be asking the right questions, and you have to be genuine in soliciting that feedback. We've probably all seen some of the old school mailers that people put out of, here's 35 questions about what you think about X, and the last 5 questions are all begging you to donate, right? It's a classic old school acquisition package, and it used to work, and maybe it sometimes still does, but there was no genuine feeling towards that, right? No one collected the answers to those surveys and said, well, how are we communicating with our donors? Well, no, they collected the donations and they threw them in the trash. So I think being genuine and soliciting feedback, not that you're going to incorporate everything a donor says, but being genuine is very, very important. And asking the right questions, as Patrick said, I can't say enough about that because it's easy to solicit feedback and ask the wrong questions, right? And at a mass scale, where I tend to see this go wrong is if you ask questions about what a donor thinks about your communications, as opposed to looking at how they behave in response to your communications, those can be very different things. Very few donors are going to answer a survey and say, I love the 12 pieces of direct mail you sent me last year and the email campaigns that solicited me for donations. I want every one of those. They will say, oh, you can just reach out to me once or twice a year and that would be great. But then when you go back and look at what your data is telling you about how they actually respond to your solicitations, that is much more important and powerful. So asking the right questions for your donors is very important.
I love that. I love the thread behind asking better questions tied with being genuine and being authentic. And something that we saw a lot of at Virtuous throughout the pandemic is that like our customers, nonprofits, as they were connecting with their donors through the pandemic, a lot of folks like paused solicitation overall. And instead of asking for money, people were just asking the simple question, how are you? Are you okay? How's your family? And having those like meaningful human connection touch points are critical to retaining our donors. It's about building trust and doing it authentically, I think is the key. And organizations that slow down enough to pause and do that in a genuine way, are seeing those donors return. And that's what we're seeing with our customers. So, I love the thread that they're on. Cheryl asked a great question in the chat. She asked, what are some of the specific better questions that you could be asking?
Yeah, I think, since I brought up that topic, I would say, again, you want to, first of all, get in the mind of your donor when you're writing questions and think about what are they likely to understand, right? And, recall questions about this or that aspect of the mission tend to go poorly. Questions that are very abstract for them go very poorly. So you want to be very specific. So I often, if I'm training, a big donor survey or something, it'll be, do you recall roughly the last time you donated? How well plugged into their own giving are they? Do they recall when they last donated? I'm doing a big survey right now for a bunch of nonprofits on lapsed donors. Like, what do lapsed donors think? Do they remember that they donated even? Do they think of themselves as a current donor? Some of them we're finding do. They don't remember. If you ask them when they last give, they're like, I think it was last year, but actually it was 3 years ago. They just weren't that psychologically connected to the organization. So I would say behavioral questions questions that a donor is likely to recall answers to, and questions that provide meaningful information for your nonprofit, right? It's very easy to kind of go through rote questions that don't really have much of an impact on your strategy, regardless of what the answer is. Or they ask donors to prioritize very in the weeds kind of topics that the donor is unlikely to have a lot of thoughts about. So I think one of the keys to meaningful feedback is being very concrete and making sure that the questions are very meaningful and they're going to be graspable by your donor base, which again, in our attitude as staff members or working for the nonprofit, it's very easy to veer outside of those things.
Just to ping off of what Matt said too, because I think that's a really great question, Cheryl, by the way, because I think that specifically needs to get answered just a little bit. And one of the Brian said, which is, how are you? That's such a wonderful question that turns the whole tables on to having them download, or you become this almost fundraising therapist, right? You're sort of letting them unload while you're listening and learning about what they're doing. But a piece of advice you may want to consider is that if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And what I mean by that is if you've got a question about how your pitch is coming, or you don't really know where to start in your solicitation process, ask your donors or your best supporters to help you facilitate that question. So for example, Shirian, hey, I would really love to ask you how this pitch sounds to the general public. I know you're one of our biggest supporters. I'm not asking you for money. I'm really asking you for how this feels to you during a pandemic or as we come out of a pandemic. And because I rely on individuals like yourself for supporting us, not only with money, but with sort of your perspective, I would really enjoy a conversation about how I can make this more meaningful to the larger public. And that question in itself of, could you help me, not the organization, could you help me, invests them in your success. And then they want to go and champion everything else that you do as well.
So I definitely want to tag on to that, but also realize that I'm not as smart as Patrick or Matthew in this respect. But there's a book/Audible session that I would really highly recommend for anybody by Phil M. Jones called "Exactly What to Say." And he goes through exactly what questions to ask. And he's talking about it in a sales context. But the piece that I really love in talking to Phil directly about this and its application to fundraising is from his perspective, you should, and he does this in his great British accent of, you should never, ever, 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 ever ask someone to buy something. And he said, Charing, you should never ask someone to donate. It has nothing to do with the dog. Never ask them to donate unless you can start that sentence with, because of what you just said. So it's asking the questions that help that person unearth for themselves their own commitment to making the decision to donate. And so he goes through a series of questions and a way to think about that. But there's more to that I can cover here. But I think the key is that a lot of organizations, as Brian, you mentioned, stopped asking questions or stopped talking to donors. So rather than worry about the right channel or the exact right wording, the key principle is to actually communicate with your donors in an authentic and transparent way. And so from our experience at DMPA, we did exactly that. In June of last year, we divvied up the entire active and inactive donor file amongst every staff member, and we called them and said, how are you doing? What's keeping you up at night? Is there anything that we can do to help you? We have a ton of donors who are over the age of 65. Maybe we can connect you with some other donor who can bring you toilet paper. We did that. And we had kids that were in our education program that sent videos of them singing in parks in order to cheer up people that were in our community. And we then framed that as an entire newsletter. We called it Project Joy, and we shared happy stories of things that sort of related to the arts or related to our community. And the key point in all of this, Cheryl and everybody else, is that when you talk to donors as an object rather than a subject, when you recognize that they are people who are going on their own journey, that's when their relationship to you changes. And so what I always worry about is when because I've had some extra time, I've been working with some other nonprofits who are struggling. And what I see them focused on is like metrics. There's nothing wrong with metrics. There's nothing wrong with KPIs. But when those drive your decision making and you lose track of the fact that retention rates have to do with real people, with real feelings and real dreams and desires in the world, then you've lost the whole point of why it is we're doing what we're doing. So there are some folks for whom they can't retain. They lost their jobs. And so we recognize that. How can we work with them to continue enabling their passion and their identity? Brian, as you mentioned, it's not about opening wallets. Ultimately, it's directional. We want people to give to the organization, but we want them to, I'm never going to get someone who cares about the arts to give to animal rights, right? To an animal shelter or vice versa. These people already care about the arts. So it's really about unpacking that and making sure we understand why they care about the arts so that we can demonstrate a reason to give and then report back to them on the impact that they had in the world.
But picking off of you, Cherry, because you bring up something really interesting, is that everyone here can make an ask that has nothing to do with money.
Yeah.
You can ask people to support you by telling others about your organization, right? Third-party endorsement is exponentially more important than first-party solicitation, period. Having people get you in front of others because they're so hell-bent on telling your story, because they're so passionate about it, exactly what Chirian just said, is an ask. You can ask them to do that, and it costs them $0. So, all the passion in the world. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but like now I'm super excited because one of the things that Phil,
it's about passion, Chirian.
It's all about passion. So the thing that Phil talks about in this book, in this session, that was mind-blowing to me is that everybody in sales, like in any business, realizes, and this is true in your nonprofit as well, that word of mouth advocacy is the number one way that people make a decision. If you read Amazon reviews, if you look at Yelp, you are looking at your neighbors or other people who are advocating for you doing something. And yet there are very few businesses and almost zero nonprofits that have a word of mouth advocacy strategy. So Patrick is 155% correct on you talking to these people about how they can share with one other person. Is there anyone else that you know? This is the literal question to ask Cheryl and everybody else. Is there anyone else that you know that is exactly like you, that cares about the arts, just like you do, and is passionate about making the arts accessible in our community? And they answer and they say, yeah, I know a couple of people like that. Those are the people we go to shows with. Those are the people that we hang out with. Would you mind talking to them about what you love about donating and about being involved with Des Moines Performing Arts? And I mean, he has a whole pathway of how to do this. And it's absolutely brilliant because this is what makes a difference. This is what drives people to make an actual decision that's meaningful. So, Patrick, yes, all the things.
I dropped the mic, but it'd make a loud noise.
Yeah, mine's hooked up to it. Boom, and I can't drop it.
Amazing. What's really interesting is like we're also on these threads around donor centricity, which is something that came up a little bit earlier. And we've been having a lot of conversations with various nonprofits about this. And something that came up recently about like putting the donor at the center beyond just being a giver is like, how do you put the donor at the center of your mission? And one organization, we've highlighted them a bunch in recently, and I just have to give them a shout out again. We had a couple conversations with the team at To Write Love in Our Arms. It's a mental health charity working to help people struggling with mental health. And a great question came up in one of our other roundtables about how do you deliver a meaningful ask around getting someone to say, for example, participate in a birthday fundraiser? And To Write Love actually doesn't ask people to start a fundraising page and ask people for money. They ask people to use their birthdays as a way to celebrating how far they've come. They ask people to share their story. They give them tools and equip them to use language that isn't triggering, so that people can get on social media and talk to their friends and family about, this is something I struggle with, but this is how far I've made it. And I get to be here today to share another birthday with you in this world. And that's the avenue in which they get people to fundraise and to give and to donate. It's putting the donor right in the center, and it's more than a dollar amount. And, and something else we talk about a lot is, the value of a major donor who gives $10,000 or $100,000 is equal to the value of the donor that gives $10. And it's equal weight in what someone gives on behalf of themselves and what they're capable, and what, wherever they are in their life, in their journey. That donation, no matter how big or small from a number standpoint, could mean the world to someone. And so part of donor retention is making sure that we honor the smaller donors. We honor the smaller donations. We cannot leave behind 95% of our donors because we're so focused on our top 5% of givers. We have to empower the stories and the transformation and the power when someone gives $10, $25, $100, because every single dollar matters from the heart and passion point of the donor who gave it.
So true. So true. I'm sitting on a stack of donor acknowledgments that I need to do after this is over. And so we have 6,000-ish donors in our house file that give every year. And my team thinks I'm ridiculous because I hand sign everyone that gives us $1 or $100,000, and I write a handwritten note on the top of each one that sticks out so they see it. And the reason is because exactly that. First of all, we honor and appreciate every single gift. Every single gift is someone making a decision that they didn't necessarily have to make. And let me be very clear as a caveat. I am not saying this prescriptively to all of you who are like me as a fundraiser, you have to do this. I'm saying I choose to do this, and this is what I allocate my time to do. But if you choose not to, don't feel bad about not doing that. I want to build that relationship in this way with these donors. And I don't want it to ever feel like there are $100,000 that are getting something and $10 donors that are getting something different. And that, it is what it is. But I will say that the key component, if you have difficulty justifying this, because I talk with nonprofits all the time who are like, well, we don't have time or we can't do that or whatever. And my question to them is, can you reallocate what you're doing? But realistically, sometimes board members are like, I'm not going to call and thank a $10 donor. And I tell them the example of this billionaire in our community who his first gift to the University of Iowa was $25. $25 was John Papajohn's first gift to the University of Iowa. And now there's a school named after him because they stewarded him well before he had money. And so if you're looking for an outcome-based reason, these donors, when they feel good about giving and they feel like their gifts have made a difference, they go and they do more. And he went to a business class where the building was named after him, and handed out $50 to each of the students in the class and said, now go and give this, because he wanted to encourage that level of giving. He's like, maybe you don't have $50 right now because you're a broke college student. Practice generosity. And that's what we want to do, is encourage generosity through our nonprofits, right? Our goal should be to elevate philanthropy so that everyone's excited about giving. And the thing that I talk about, because we're an open book, I'm an open book with all of our strategies. You want anything from us, take it. Like, here, I'll give it to you. Because what I need is for everybody to do philanthropy well. I don't need donors who are like, I got burned by this organization and I never want to give again. what we forget is that we're part of a larger ecosystem that has negative externalities. So when the organization down the street does a crappy job with their fundraising or their stewardship and they're losing donors left and right, it impacts everybody else. So that's why I do this kind of thing. Like why I get on these conversations is because we all have to do better so that we can all do better.
Well, and the other thing too is that if you have no time during the week, carve out 20 minutes or 40 minutes for gratitude and celebration a week. That's it. Start there, right? Everybody's got 20 minutes. You've been flipping through Facebook for 20 minutes and it's already gone. So use that time to pick up the phone and make 5 phone calls. And I'll piggyback off of Sherry and like suggest like, hey, by the way, this $25 gift came into a multiple building kind of deal. When I was working at the Ann Carlson Center, and we had a gentleman pass away in the community who left us a significant amount of money. The only gift we had was a $6 gift in 1984. $6 in 1984. We had no communication with him. We had nothing. And he left us $350,000. What keeps me up at night is the fact that what if that person was connected with to say, thank you for the $6? What does that $350,000 do? Could it be the $1 billion? Could it be the entire estate? He was a single farmer in the middle of nowhere, and he had no connection to anything other than probably one of our board members bumped into him at a coffee shop and talked about it. The what ifs are there small donors that turn into these big ones, and you don't have to move heaven and earth, but you got to do enough to make them feel like that was worth their time and their cash.
Love it. Matt,
Sorry,
I want to,
yeah.
If Matt was like jumping to get in a minute ago.
No, it's we're all in wonderful agreement here. I was just going to echo both of you now and say I've seen that in organizations' data over and over and over as a consultant. If you've never done this before, go back, today or tomorrow, look in your donor database, pick out, your top 100 major donors or all the people in the top level of your major donor club, and look at what their first donation was and when it occurred. And if you haven't thought down this trail before, you will be shocked, or you will find, executives in your organization, when you show them, will be shocked. This person who gave the lead gift to our campaign gave a $100 check, a decade ago. And that's how it started.
Yes.
And once you start to absorb what that means, then I think you start to open up a whole world of exciting possibilities about what you need to be doing with your smaller dollar and your mid-dollar donors, so that when that $100 donor goes away, you didn't lose $100, right? You didn't even lose $100 next year. You lost a lifetime of possibilities. And so I find in fundraising as a whole, particularly mid-dollar, which the definition of which may differ depending on your organization, but particularly the mid-dollar people, they're not in your major donor club yet, are horribly served, even by large organizations that have a lot of staff resources they could put into it, because people are not thinking deeply enough about the future value that is locked up in that cohort.
Awesome. Well, this conversation rules. Thank you, guys. I'm being mindful of the time. It's currently, we've got about 17 minutes left. There's one more question I want to ask, and then I want to get the three of you into breakout groups in just a little bit more intimate setting with the folks here that are attending, so that you can open up a conversation individually with some of the attendees for about 10 minutes. But one thing I want to end on that I'm curious on getting your insight into is, we talked a lot about creating authentic relationships, building personalized relationships with our donors and listening. And where I want to kind of end on for the panel is, how do you listen without actually asking a question? How do you track behavior or the actions that supporters and donors are making in today's day and age to be able to better understand what a donor cares about, how engaged they are with you, et cetera? So I'd love to just dive a little bit into maybe some practical application around tracking behavior, and what your perspectives are on that.
Opening emails, answering the phone when you call, answering an email, replying to an email, being at an event that they've gone to for a number of years. Do they show up virtually? Do they ask to how they can get involved still. Anything that they do to help move the needle forward, at least in conversation, are traits that you can then sort of like, okay, this person still cares about us. This person still looks for our things. And you can tell whether who's looking for it or who's not opening it and doesn't, or seems to be falling off. I mean, it's an easy one. And now, there's a billion other ways, but that's an easy one to just track, like who's opening your stuff and then who's picking up the phone.
I think there's a lot you can do with data points that may not come across your desk very often. You're probably not tracking them now, but they have such high value that they're worth thinking about. So what I mean by that is, in our company, we do a lot of predictive modeling where we might take an organization's data, and of course they have all the donation data, they might have well-screened data, they might have email open rates per an individual and those sorts of things. Hopefully they have that. But then some of our biggest successes have been with organizations that have layers of data beyond that, right? So take a university with a call center, for example, right? Okay, you're making outbound calls. You've got your students and alumni trying to make calls to donors. But then are you also tracking inbound calls? So we had a small college in the Midwest who was tracking whether when someone moved, did they call into the university and say, this is my new address, I want to make sure you have this information. And they could tell that specifically. The donor called in, it didn't just happen because we did a data processing thing. That's how the address was updated. And that turned out to be, of any single factor, that was the most predictive thing for plan giving, was whether you called in and updated your address. So those steps that are the donor really stepping out there, they're calling in, they want more information. They're engaging with staff. They're coming to events and seeking you out. Those are often really, really highly valuable data points that are hard to track, and most people don't manage to do it. But if you can, it can be absolutely incredible for your fundraising operation.
So I don't know if I learned that from American Philanthropic or not back when I worked with you all, but someone emailed this week with an update to their address, and I immediately called her and said, hey, let's set up a conversation, because I was like, that's a plan giving prospect. That was as soon as that email came in, I was like, that's what that means. So that's funny that you mentioned that when it happened this week. I will say from a data perspective, there's leading indicators and lagging indicators, and my whole field of study right now personally is around this. So all the times anyone sticks up their hand and says, I want to know more, I want to be more involved, those should all go in your database in whatever ways make sense for you to track and actually use, because it's helpful in making predictive decisions and modeling decisions. So there's demographic information, which can be helpful. There's psychographic information. Where my field of study is right now is in the behavioral science that applies all of those things. But also, if you have time, there's a TED Talk from Malcolm Gladwell on Howard Moskowitz and his invention, if you will, of spaghetti sauce. And what... So I studied under Howard, and what Howard discovered is that people actually didn't know that they wanted chunky spaghetti sauce. And so he's developed an entire science around this that's used by every Fortune 500 company. It's a rule developing experimentation, and you actually don't ask questions of people. You create survey statements, and you do a regression analysis on those statements to understand what they actually think, their mindsets. And so it's really helpful in uncovering why people would behave a certain way, even though they might say something one way or another. So it's really useful in that respect, which is why we have cherry Dr. Pepper, and why we have rewards credit cards and chunky spaghetti sauce, which are all Howard's things. So it's Malcolm Gladwell who said that, Cheryl, who did that. He was supposed to talk about his book, and he's like, I just want to talk about my personal hero, Howard Moskowitz. So it's a fun chat, but a good 17 minutes of your life.
Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we are unfortunately at time. I wish we had more time, but the good news is that we are going to be doing a lot more of these. Here at Virtuous, we host these roundtable discussions every week. So there's an opportunity to tune into more topics, more discussions, and we're going to be talking about donor retention a lot for the next 2 months. So I want to let you know that more of that is coming. I also want to call out, there was a great resource that Cherian shared in the breakout, and I'm going to link it here. It is literally the oldest customer complaint, etched in stone. It's 5,000 years old, and it's a great reference to donor retention. So I'm linking that in the chat for everyone to check out. And also want to let you know that if you want more resources, we have tons coming. We have a free ebook that we released last week with 12 insights shared from 12 different nonprofit leaders on how to engage and retain donors. We're also going to be releasing a donor retention playbook next week. So we'll make sure that everybody that was here today gets those resources. I want to give a huge shout out to our panelists. Thank you so much, Patrick, Matt, and Cherian. Thanks for joining us. Loved your insights, love your thought leadership. And we'll also make this recording available. So I'll be sure to send you all a personal email with the link to be able to watch the recording and to download the ebook. So we've got lots more to come. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you for all of the work that you do. Thank you for the causes that you champion. The world needs you, and much more to come. Thank you so much.